Hello, and welcome to this episode of Counsel Trends. I am Dr. Shawnee Anderson with Dr. Mercy Connors. And the article that we're reviewing today is called The Past That Ties Us Together, Nostalgia Strengthens Social Networks. And it comes from Cognition and Emotion Journal in, I believe it was 2025, January 2025. And Mercy, what did you think of this article? I know you're not a fan.
I was not a fan. It was, I think it's the way that they define nostalgia. And I think of it in a different way, and we can talk about that a little bit. But I don't know. It was an interesting one for me. It was.
It was not what I was expecting.
No.
At all.
No.
And really what the article talks about is how nostalgia is a social construct.
Yes.
Which surprised me just off the bat because I am highly nostalgic. And I know for me, yes, when I have my nostalgic moments, I definitely include people and friends and family and things like that. But I wouldn't see it as like feeding my relationships or maintaining my relationships or anything like that. I see it as such more of an internal process. Mm-hmm. What about you?
Well, and this is probably really funny. Nostalgia to me is not really like people. It's like things or like, okay, so the other day, I was telling Shawnee this. The other day, I had this waffle with syrup. And I don't normally eat waffles with syrup, but as soon as I took a bite of it, it was like I was transported to like when I was 5 years old in my childhood home. Now, in that memory, nobody's there. It's just me and the waffle.
Which is so interesting. Which is interesting because I just got an invitation in the mail last week because one of my sorority sisters was living in Malibu, Pacific Palisades, and lost everything in the fires. Yeah. And so all of my sorority sisters are getting together to give her kind of like a shower to help give her everything because she lost absolutely everything. Yeah. Yeah. And so when I got that, I was like, oh, and I got so nostalgic of all of our fun times in college. And mine are definitely about people. Yeah. So we don't know exactly what that means, but we're going to take it into the study.
We're thinking Mercy's probably on the wrong side here.
Well, let's look at the definition that they use. They talk about nostalgia as being either a trait-like characteristic or a state-level experience.
See, I think I'm state level. I don't think I'm trait.
Maybe that's it, that you'll have those moments.
I will have those moments, but
it's not like a trait of your personality.
Yeah.
That could be it.
Yes.
Well, what the way they're defining, do you want to read the definition that they have for nostalgia?
So it is defined as the proclivity to bring to mind and reflect wistfully upon fond and meaningful experiences from one's personal past.
See, so it doesn't necessarily have to be about people.
It can be about waffles.
It can be about waffles. Absolutely. So funny. But then their thoughts about nostalgia is that it is a profoundly social emotion.
Yeah, and see, that's where I kind of have the hard time because I'm not sure, and maybe this may just be me, I don't necessarily think of nostalgia as that. I think of it.
Neither do I.
Yeah, I think of it as like going into like a one of those stores that's like a retro store and like looking at being like, oh, I remember when we would, play with these types of dolls or something like that.
Okay.
That's more of what I think of with nostalgia, not necessarily, I think of fond memories, not like, I don't know, maybe that's like enough.
Well, but when they're talking about nostalgia, again, it's just having these recollections of experiences.
Right.
But these authors in particular wanted to look to see how it impacts social relationships. And so really what they did is they did 4 different studies. And it's one of those. It was extensive. And so I actually made a little notes for myself. The first study that they looked at had 449 undergraduate students, and they were looking at how nostalgic you were, and did that relate to your motivation to expand your social networks or to maintain your social networks, and also was it related to the number of social networks that you have?
Yeah.
And one of the scales that they used was to measure nostalgia. And I think Mercy and I both did the scale. And the way they define nostalgia is sentimental longing for the past. And the scale is a 7-item scale called the Southampton Nostalgia Scale. And Mercy and I both took it. We answered each question and then divided it by 7. And what was your score?
3.14.
Was your average. So if you look at it, it's 1 through 7.
Yep.
7 means you're the most nostalgic. 1 means you're not nostalgic at all. So you were about 3.
Yes.
And mine was 5.57.
Yep.
So if I were to round up, almost a 6.
Yep.
So I am clearly way more nostalgic than you.
Yes.
But I always think like Enneagrams were both 2s.
Yeah.
And so it is very interesting of what makes us different
Yes.
with nostalgia.
Yes. I think also too, like what we talked about before we even started filming was I don't necessarily feel like I have time to think about the past very often because I have 3 little girls, I'm working full time. But you were even saying you don't feel like you have time.
I have no time, but I am nostalgic all the time. And I think for me, it may just be a wistful thought for 2 seconds of something from the past, that something in the present will remind me of something in the past. And I'll be like, oh, and then move on.
Yeah, I don't think I do that.
I don't think you do either based on your scores. So back to our article. So the first study was, again, looking at nostalgia. And what I thought was interesting, that the average mean score for people in this study on nostalgia was 4.46. So a little less than mine.
And I did not make it there.
A lot more than Mercy. You actually were greater than 1 standard deviation away from the mean, which I think is very interesting, but we're not going to explore what that's about. But what they did find in this study was that nostalgia was actually connected to a desire to expand your social network, but also to maintain your social network.
Yeah, which I find that very interesting that nostalgia would be connected to expanding your social network. Because I would have said it would have been to maintain the social network because you had the good times. But, then in reflecting on it, maybe they were hoping to have these good times with other people.
In the future?
Yeah, maybe.
I know. I thought that was really weird,
that was
too.
odd.
But I also think it's interesting that it is related to a motivation to maintain your friendship. I mean, I guess I can see how nostalgia ties into that, but I don't think that is what motivates me to maintain my friendships. I don't know. It's very interesting.
But you were right. You were talking about how this is an internal thing, and that's more of an external thing. So,
but they are talking about the motivation to do those things.
Yes, that's true. So.
But it was also very slightly connected to a close network. They defined your social networks as being the closest, close, and like the least close.
Yep.
And that it definitely was connected to the closest social network to you. And then as those networks got further away, it wasn't really associated with
And the other thing we have to say is that they were specifically looking at friendships, not at familial relationships, which I think does parse out that difference there.
So that was just the results of the first study. They then wanted to look to see if there would be a change across time. And so they looked, I believe, taking a subset. They then had 85 undergraduates, and they assessed them at baseline. And then just a month later, which I thought
that was odd too.
I thought that was silly, to determine if there was motivation to maintain their social networks. And they did find that. And again, I think the big overreaching issue with this article is that if you are nostalgic, it will help you, or it is at least connected to maintaining social connections.
Yeah, and I can definitely see that because you've had good times in the past, you want to have good times in the future. It's also that remembering, that reminiscing that's really, really fun.
That's what I'm wondering, if it might be tied really to reminiscing. Because I know when I told you about the email that I
Yes.
got from my friend,
Yep.
she actually sent it with an old picture of all of the sorority sisters. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, I remember that party. That was so much fun. That was such a great time.
Yeah.
And there was this shared remembrance.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering if it's about like time travel and that it kind of takes you back in your mind and those positive emotions continue to kind of push into the present and future to maintain those relationships.
Yeah, and I can definitely see that, and I can see how that would be important. I think it's also interesting that we're talking about undergraduate students, because I feel like undergraduate students may be more nostalgic for high school and things like that. But, I mean, as we get older, I could see maybe the nostalgia would grow, or maybe it would diminish depending on what's going on in life.
That's a really good point, because they were addressing how some of the research that's been conducted looks at what are the variables that maybe make somebody more or less nostalgic. And they were talking about age.
Yes.
And moving and changes. And so for college students, you're right. They just left home.
Yes.
They may be more nostalgic for what things were like at home and high school memories and things like that.
And I can remember probably back to undergrad, I was more, when I first came home after my first semester at college, I did want to get together with all my friends from high school.
See, I'm already getting nostalgic. See, I'm remembering when I first came home. You're right. It's like, where do you go in your mind when you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I do, but then what I was going to say is that after that one semester, I didn't get back together with any of them after that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. See, because even just when you said the first time we got home, I remember the first time coming home after college and getting together with all of my high school friends. And like people still do it. There's this one place in my hometown that over Thanksgiving break, everybody comes back to. And it's not just my class, which is 1,000 years ago, but it's like current classes and all the subsequent classes.
Then that could be like a cultural thing for your area.
Maybe.
This is something that's important to our hometown. This is what we do. I grew up in not really a hometowny type of situation. A lot of us were traveling from multiple, from some few counties over to get to our Christian school. We had a very small Christian school. There was a lot of we also lived in a very transient place. So people were in and out often.
Well, that makes a lot of sense.
So it could be the culture in which
it really could, because I'm thinking my hometown, so many of my friends are still living there.
Yeah.
And many of them bought their parents' house, and it's like a generational thing. And I'm wondering if that is a function.
Yeah, and most of my friends from high school, I would say, either do not live in the same county, but could be like in the farther counties out or in different states. A lot of them are in different states.
See, and this is where I wish that they had included some of what we're talking about right now in the limitations of the study.
Yeah.
Because I feel like in some ways they just kind of showed over and over that if you're highly nostalgic, you're going to want to maintain those relationships.
Yep.
They even replicated the study with a population sample of 396 individuals, and they kind of found the same results again.
Yeah.
So if you're nostalgic, you are going to have a motivation to both expand your social network and maintain your social network.
But I would like to see, as we're talking about it, what about these different types of places, like a more transient place where I grew up as compared to more of a hometown feel to where you grew up? I wonder if there would be a difference.
Well, just as we were talking about, might it also reflect certain personality traits that we have?
Yeah.
I'm extremely extroverted. My father's very extroverted. My family was very, very involved in a lot of social things growing up.
Yep.
And you had shared yours is very different.
Yeah, no, pretty much, my family was involved in lots of different things like church and things like that. But when we were the four of us, it was just me and my brother. When it was just the four of us, it was the four of us. There wasn't a lot of going out with other families or having friends over. Now when we started dating, it was the dating person came with the family. It was not a lot of big group things.
So I wonder if that then ties into it, that if your family was more kind of family focused and that is where your social network lied compared to mine. everything that I knew ever since I was a little kid was, my dad went to the USC football games with all these people.
Yep.
And every summer we would go on vacation with all these other families.
Yep.
And we were always very invested in the community and always having people over. And I still am that way to this day.
Yep.
Very social, very interactive with people and really want to hold on to those relationships.
Yeah, and I would say my husband is much more that way. And so
Yes,
he has encouraged me in that. And I think if maybe my family had been more open to it, like I would have been more interested in having friends over and stuff like that. But it was just not like that. It was,
Well, and I'm also thinking Jesse's a lot more extroverted.
yes.
And what I think is interesting is in the last study, they actually looked at personality traits, which I thought was very interesting. So the last study, once again, looked at nostalgia. And this time it was looking at social networks size.
Yep.
And it had 520 participants from an online population group in the Netherlands. And they looked at it across time this time. So they measured, do you have the times in which they measured it? They measured it over several years.
Yes, it was started in 2013 and it ended in 2019.
Okay. And what they found is that nostalgia does increase with age, which I thought was interesting, but it also wasn't really associated with what we know of are the big 5 personality traits.
Okay.
Let me double check those big 5. I know they are extroversion, conscientiousness. Where are they? I know I have them here somewhere. And it was only associated, I believe, with neuroticism.
Which that's an interesting one to have it connected to.
Right, because people who tend to be more neurotic tend to be kind of more depressive, more anxious, more introverted, and not really like personal relationships. And so they kind of addressed what that was about. But it brings up to me what I thought we were talking about before is I'm wondering if nostalgia may be more closely tied maybe to attachment style.
Yeah.
Because I know for me, when I was growing up, I was very preoccupied, anxious. And I know I used to always stay in contact. Like I even had a pen pal that I met when we were on a family vacation.
Yep.
And I met her in Utah and we stayed in contact. And I think like that's something for nostalgia is like back in the day was pen pals. Now I think it's more social media to stay connected. But I'm wondering, because I know again for me, being more anxious, I think I would reach out to people to maintain close relationships because I didn't really feel like I had them at home.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. But I also think too that, people, I think it's also how does a family look at friendships and relationships? How does the family talk about friendships and relationships? In my family, it was very much, this is your family. This is the people that are always going to be with you no matter what. Your friendships are going to come and go, that type of concept.
So almost like blood is thicker
than water.
Water and friendship. So stay close to the family.
Yes. And so I think, again, and that may not have been exactly your experience because your dad was really interested in a whole bunch of people and then you were really interested in a whole bunch of people. So I think that it really may also be a familial culture type of thing because I do think, like, thinking back to it, there's lots of people in my high school that still get together and connect and stuff like that. But I'm just not one of them.
Right.
And I'm even thinking about college. There are people that get connected in college. But it also could be I'm not on social media, which that's another factor.
But then that's also it of why are you not on social media? And that's where I think it'd be an interesting study to see if people who are on social media tend to be more nostalgic.
I would say probably yes. Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm on social media. I don't have much time for it, but I love to stay connected to friends, from high school, from college, from years in Bible study and all these different times in my life. That, I don't know, even just now, it brings me so much joy
I can
to think about these relationships that, again, I don't know if it's encouraging me to make more friendships, but I do know when I do make friendships, like, our good friendship, that those things are so, so important to me and that I do put relationships having so much value and always making sure to reach out to people on their birthday and to stay connected in some way, even if it's not, a lot. It may just be a Christmas card and a happy birthday text or something.
And I think that's a wonderful thing, because what you're talking about is that nostalgia doesn't have to be something that you're like hyper focused on. This is something that can be, when I think of it, I'm going to engage in it. And therefore, that is maintaining those relationships.
Right.
But I also want other people like me out there to hear, you're not weird, because
you're not weird.
Like me.
But I do think one of the last findings in the study was very interesting when it talked about people who had high nostalgia across time, maintained relationships for the long term, and people with lower nostalgia actually lost more friendships. And so I know Dr. Mark Mayfield talks about that. I think that I can't remember the exact number. I don't know if it's like everybody needs at least 5 people in their life to keep them from feeling lonely.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how that might tie into this. And we're in such a world where people are so disconnected.
Yep.
And we know we're in a crisis of loneliness. So I think important to think about if you're struggling with loneliness and struggling with friendships, especially since everything is so driven by the internet now.
Yeah. But I think one of the things that you can do is you can reach out. Like,
Yes.
the internet does make that easier. But again, you've got to have that internal self-motivation to reach out and then to maintain.
Right.
So be aware of that. You know,
and it may be tied, well, according to this, it is tied to nostalgic. So everybody pull out your old high school yearbook if you still have it. I'm just kidding. But I think it would be interesting to see if people maybe took an effort of trying to be nostalgic and if anything changed in their lives.
I think that would be very interesting. I may try that myself. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. If you liked this topic, give us a thumbs up. Of course, subscribe to our channel if you want to hear more from us. And give us a comment. Did you like what we talked about with nostalgia? Who out there's like me, who's not very nostalgic?
Or who's like me, super nostalgic?
We would love to hear from you. Also, let us know what topics you would like us to engage with. We would love to hear from you. And again, we love being a part of your life.